Daniella Loftus is an award-winning founder, writer, and investor in the field of digital fashion. She started content platform This Outfit Does Not Exist in 2020 with the goal of bringing digital fashion to life. Over the past 5 years, Dani has grown to become a founding member of digital fashion investment vehicle Red DAO and built a luxury fashion platform, DRAUP, repositioning code as couture. Focusing on how the bounds of craft and self-expression can be digitally extended, Dani has had her generative work displayed at Christie's auction house, in Tokyo's Museum of Contemporary Art, and at the recent Dakar Biennale, with her digitally dressed images featured across Vogue, DAZED, Bricks, and the New York Times.
Hi everyone. Daniel, thank you so much for having me today. I am incredibly excited to be speaking to all of you. And the thing that I'm going to be speaking about is this concept that clothes need context. So I'm going to spend the next 45 minutes going into how cultural codes in virtual worlds are going to shape the way that we dress. So before I go into this topic specifically, I'll very, very briefly tell you about me and specifically why this is something that I'm very passionate about. The way that I got into the digital art space was through a blog that I founded at the end of 2020 called This Outfit Does Not Exist. And before that, I was working in emerging technologies, completely sector agnostic, so for everyone from Facebook to BP to a car company in the UK, and what my job was to go into those large companies and basically say, this is how the future of your industry is changing, and this is how you're going to respond, and then help them implement future-facing technologies in order to do that. So that was one side of what I was doing. On the other side, I've always been obsessed with fashion, but when I was growing up, fashion technology wasn't really a thing. And the way that I felt growing up in the 2000s was essentially that we had this first wave of these unbelievable designers coming, especially out of London, like Westwood, like McQueen. And there was this concept that you could kind of start from nothing and build a fashion empire. And then I think I was moving from seeing that to seeing a lot of mass consumption. And I was feeling quite depressed about the whole thing. So I basically said to myself, fashion is going to be something I'm very passionate about, but I don't see how I can work in it at this point. So I'm going to work in tech and really explore the future of how our society is going to be shaped. That all changed in about 2018, 2019, when I became fascinated with our progress in virtual worlds. And during the pandemic, I was looking at spaces like Animal Crossing, for example, which are not fashion games, but all of a sudden we were starting to see people using these as vessels for self-expression. We were also seeing people utilizing them for things that we wouldn't have even imagined a couple of years ago. We had T-Pain doing a tour of his crib. We had dominatrixes using it to get money from submissives that they couldn't meet in person. And so it was this idea that when you have a virtual space which is relatively open in terms of what it allows you to do, people are going to use it in ways you could have never expected. So where that brought me was to really thinking, how is that going to influence fashion? And we had the CMO of Gucci coming in, and I think it was late 2020, and saying, we're going to start designing digital clothes. And I was like, okay, well, the future's about to happen. And I remember at that point looking online and searching the term digital fashion, but nothing came up. There was nothing when you Googled the term digital fashion. So I originally pitched a bunch of magazines. I was writing to Bloomberg, writing to Wired, being like, let me investigate this for you. And they basically said, there's no brand traction, it's too early. So I did some more research and I found a handful of brands who were starting up at the time. You know, they were 2-3 months old, brands like Tribute Brand, brands like Dress X, brands like Artisan. And I was basically like, hey, listen, I'm going to write about your work. And so I started this newsletter, which I still write today, called This Outfit Does Not Exist. But I realized that it's fashion, so it doesn't, as much as it matters that I write about it, what's really going to grip people is being able to see how good it can get. And when I started to find a couple of young designers who were doing that, I decided to start an Instagram page linked to the newsletter where I showcased what I saw as the best of digital fashion. And I got very, very lucky because this was 6-7 months before the pandemic, before the NFT boom happened. And so when that happened and all of a sudden all the brands were in it and there was all of the media attention, I was one of the few people who was already in the space. So went on to become one of the founding members of an investment vehicle, and what we do is we invest in promising young designers, companies that are building the future of the space, and that's called DAO. And I also built a digitally native fashion platform called DRAUP. And specifically what we're doing with DRAUP is trying to get people to reposition digital craft as high craft, which is something that we're going to end up doing in fashion, in the arts. You know, it's going to take us like 15, 20 years. It's not going to be overnight. And so we work with different systems. For example, we worked with generative algorithms for some of our first collections, with digital artists, and we do a lot of work to basically explain, why is this actually really, really hard? Why couldn't your 6-year-old do this? Why should this be taken seriously? And I think particularly with working with very talented digital artists, it kind of helps to translate that, because if you already have a collector base that understands why your work is valuable, and then you're changing it into fashion, it's already making a leap in the right direction, or a step in the right direction, to getting people to believe that digital fashion can be something that's not just a quick and easy commodity. So that's a little bit of context. And obviously, as somebody who started in this world because I was excited about the ways that I could manipulate my digital body, this is something very, very close to my heart. And actually, for this lecture, I'm going deep on a subject that I haven't gone that deep on before. And it was very interesting to explore this topic more conceptually. So I'm excited to share more of it with you. So we're going to start very, very basic. We're going to start with the idea of the role of clothes. And what this is about is the difference between what we need in the digital space and what we need in the physical space. So if you look, these might not look like they're all in the middle, but actually it's where the dot is. So these are all directly in the middle. I would say that in terms of digital clothing, a lot of the uses are actually very similar to what we use our physical clothes for. So we have at the very, very top functionality, and we have at the bottom self-expression. So digital clothes, in the same way as their physical counterparts, actually have a productive value. And the way that I define a productive value is this allows me to complete a task. So in the virtual world, that could be an amulet you acquire in a questing game. In the physical world, it could be a Hugo Boss jacket that has a ski pass in it. You can't get on the ski lift without a ski pass. You can't go to the next level of the quest without the amulet. So that's the first component. Second one is security. In the physical world, this equates to a bulletproof vest. In the digital world, this could be armor in a game that you're getting shot at. Category 3 is optimization. So I would think about that as hiking equipment in the physical world. I would think about that as some form of a power-up in the digital world. Then the next class is economic, so a uniform. There are games like, I believe it was Animal Crossing, where they implemented, Decentraland, they implemented a casino, and people were actually being paid real money to take on casino jobs. And obviously, in order to do that, you had to wear a uniform in the same way that you would have to do if you were working as an air hostess, for example. Then we get to this point where we're still directly slap bang in the middle of the physical-digital divide, but we're starting to tend more towards self-expression. So something I would say is directly in the middle of a clothing type that is functional and expressive is clothes that derive status. So, for example, a designer handbag or a rare in-game item. Whilst it's not the same as a uniform or a piece of hiking equipment, in that it's not in all contexts that it's going to enhance your ability to do a task. Let's say you are trying to get into a bougie nightclub. The way that you look and the status that you convey from your appearance is going to affect the way that people perceive you, and it's going to help or hinder you. And I think status and digital goods are very intricately connected. And there are a lot of mechanics of how you accrue status in games, but I think that's something very important to touch on. Then, getting further towards expression, we have affiliation. So in the physical world, you'd wear a band t-shirt, for example, to show you're a part of a group with shared cultural values of the band. Digital world, we have something like Bored Ape Yacht Club, which was an NFT project that became very successful during 2020, 2021, etc. And the Bored Ape Yacht Club was a collection of 10,000 apes, which were PFPs, so pictures for profile. And if you had a bored ape, especially as they went up in value, it was shown that you were part of community. But also if you had a rarer one than someone else, and out of the 10,000, each were ranked by their rarity because each were unique, you have higher status within the collective. And we started to see all these interesting phenomena like ape for ape. So people would follow each other on social media based on if they had this specific PFP. We saw physical locations pop up, which you could only go to if you had this specific digital asset. And so that was a very interesting phenomena which mirrors the physical signs of affiliation that we see in our everyday lives. Then we have emotional. So for example, a mourning suit, that would convey that you were obviously in mourning or going to a funeral. You'd be structuring the way that you dressed according to an occasion. Similarly, a wedding dress, occasional. And then obviously at the very, very bottom, which is to do with hyper-expression, we have clothes that you make yourself. Obviously, there's a degree to which these then kind of go back to status, because if you're an amazing designer, you're going to accrue status from your clothes, but this is an even more simple context. You're not buying something branded, you are looking at something which you are making yourself, or as we call it in the in-game world, user-generated content. There's one final point, which is an outlier here, which is a function of physical clothing that does not exist in the digital, which is literally the physiological. So if I go out now and I don't have a raincoat, which I don't, even though it looks waterproof, I am going to get wet, or I am going to get cold. Obviously, in the digital space, we don't have those same bodies, so we don't have those considerations unless it's programmed into a virtual world. So that's kind of out, off, onto the right. But with everything else, I think the point that I'm trying to make is the digital and physical share a lot of components in terms of the role of clothes and thus the roles of bodies. They just have their own unique characteristics. This brings me on to the next concept, which is a concept that platforms breed wearers. So we live in a century or an age or 5 years or a decade where anyone from anywhere in the world pretty much can ascribe to a specific cultural subculture. You go on TikTok, you can join a trend, you find your favorite designers. You know, when I started in digital fashion, no one around me cared about the thing that I cared about, so I found friends on Clubhouse. However, I want you to think back to the way things were 20, 30 years ago, where a lot of culture was actually locationally based. And therefore, it was shaped by the place that you were, the laws that governed that place, the traditions, the history, the behaviors. And for me, there is a clear parallel between that state of being culturally and the state of being in virtual worlds that we have now. So the idea that virtual worlds shape their wearers is the idea that virtual worlds influence how our bodies are virtually and the way that wearership exists in 5 different forms. So first of all, their purpose. So what modes of interaction have these platforms built? So, for example, if it is a questing game, you are going to be influenced to quest. You might be interacting with NPCs, non-player characters. You're not going to necessarily be hanging out. Maybe there's not going to be fashion built in. So their purpose, and thus your purpose, is constricted. And the second one is to do with the graphical interface. So what file formats does each platform support? Crypto voxels, for example, super low fidelity. On the other hand, you have games like Fortnite, which are far more high fidelity. So then that also shapes both how your body looks and how the clothes you consume appear. Next, we have the freedom of interaction. So some digital platforms are very tightly moderated in the way you can interact and what you can create, how you can speak to others. And obviously that then shapes all of the elements that we previously discussed. Number 4, the freedom of self-expression. So how does the platform actually allow you to self-express? Are you playing or interacting the whole time in something uniform? Or can you customize? Can you acquire new things? Can you morph your digital body? And then that bleeds into the final idea, which is what are the cultural norms and behaviors that the platform promotes? So is the platform actually going one step further than saying you can self-express and actually introducing incentives for self-expression? We see this at the moment, for example, in Roblox, where the game Dress to Impress is obviously incredibly popular. Increasingly, as that game's grown in popularity, you have an incentive to play it. And the makers of Roblox actually explicitly said in their developer conference 2 weeks ago that they have a goal to have a fashion designer come out of Roblox and become world famous who has never had experience in physical design. So within that platform, they are incentivizing you to behave in a way which is to do with distorting and enhancing your digital body and creating fashion around it. So, as virtual worlds have evolved, each of the elements we just discussed have actually ended up evolving with them. That's not to say we still don't have platforms which are constrictive, most likely on purpose in terms of how you can self-express, how you can move your digital body, what you can do. But with a lot of these platforms, they are becoming more open, more expressive, as they can also reflect that we crave that. And as I think it was quite obvious from the last slide, the ways that these platforms evolve are both influenced by technological progress and what they can allow you to do, and also the behavioral change within society and all of us that incentivize certain behaviors. So to take you through this, I'm going to run you through how I've seen wearers, and so our digital bodies, evolve since the advent of virtual worlds. So, as far as I know, the first instance of digital fashion, or one of the first instances, was in a game called Heavyweight Champion in 1976. And, it's a super, super old arcade game. It's 2 people punching each other, and the pixels are arranged into a little pair of tiny shorts. And so that was to illustrate that this guy is a boxer. There is nothing more than that. I'm going to jump you forward now 20 years to one of my absolute favorite platforms in existence, which is Neopets. And I recently wrote a piece on how Neopets is digital fashion's Roman Empire, because the leap that was made from Heavyweight Champ to Neopets in terms of digital bodies and self-expression is just colossal. And Neopets really paved the way for the digital fashion we see today. But essentially, what made Neopets so special was, in a very similar way to a platform like Roblox, you had users creating worlds, users participating in economic systems, and within these systems, you had a thriving economy of virtual goods, a lot of which related back to your Neopet and its appearance. So you had clothes, and you have paintbrushes, and you could customize the background of your Neopet, and these became so hyper coveted that they were actually being sold on platforms like eBay for real money instead of in-game currency, because it was one of the first indicators that your status in game was becoming something that was as important as your status in the real world. So for me, that was for me and a lot of others, this was a real milestone in the progression of the wearers. This idea that you had this status that was transferable, this idea that you could really double down on the ways that you customized your avatars, and also on the fact that some goods in the game were hyper rare, like a rainbow paintbrush, whilst others were more common. So that was a real watershed moment. Then we go into The Sims, and for me what was very significant about The Sims was Neopets is fantastic, but you are interacting as a fictional character. Sims, you have the ability to replicate your own life. You are making a simulation of reality. And obviously what we saw in The Sims is we saw things like Jeremy Scott going in, doing Moschino collection, which was physical and digital. We then have Roblox, which I think is really defining virtual bodies in digital fashion today, which is very user-generated content centric. So anyone can go into the Roblox store and create and sell virtual goods, and there are hyper incentives around customization, and increasingly we're seeing a lot of fashion brands go in. So Roblox was very significant. Then we have League of Legends. League of Legends is significant because a lot of the clothes within League of Legends actually explicitly further your progress. So you can get specific outfits linked to power-ups, there's an association there with rarity, etc. So unlike something like Sims or Roblox, where fashion is purely fashion, it's you self-expressing, it's you showing affiliation and status, there was actually a functional component within League of Legends and the surrounding games, which added another element of dimensionality to the way that you control your digital body. So then we move on to the advent of social media as we know it today, or close to as we know it today. And we had Bitmoji coming in 2014. And now it's been acquired by Snapchat. But at the time, Bitmoji was very interesting because you could create a virtual version of yourself which participated in comic strip situations, and then you would message that to your friend. So that would actually be you transferring a digital avatar cross-platform, obviously in the most rudimentary way. So for me, Bitmoji was one of the first times that we saw the integration of avatars and digital bodies into the way that we interact normally in our everyday lives through messaging. We then have Lil Miquela, who is preceded in her role as the first virtual influencer by a lot of Japanese virtual idols. But I think what was very significant about Miquela is she's not a virtual idol. She doesn't sing, well, she does sing, but like that's not really what she's known for. She's known for being a fashion influencer whilst being a virtual human. And I think that was a very interesting moment in reconceptualizing how we interact with digital avatars and digital figures. And one of my favorite moments was actually when, I think it was maybe, I actually don't know what year it was in, but when there was this video of Lil Miquela making out with Bella Hadid. And that went absolutely viral because it was this idea that a virtual figure could adopt a personality, become just as influential and emotive as a physical influencer. And I think that moment really showed the synergies between the two. Then we have AR filters, which started in 2015. So the ability to layer virtual pieces onto your physical self. We had Genies, which was an extension of Bitmoji, a little bit more advanced. And again, it's you being able to message as your digital avatar. And then we had something that brought it all together, which was Memoji. So Bitmoji, Genies, these are all external apps which you have to save the avatar and or have an external app on your iPhone. Memoji was very significant because you actually had Apple integrating avatars into their operating system. And I think that really showed the direction of change in terms of big tech, regular companies taking what was once a niche very seriously in the future of our communications. And then we're almost done. Digital render, which started in 2018 to become known to a degree with a collection from Carlings. And digital render is quite simply when me, a human, Dani, submits a photo and has a fashion brand render me into a digital outfit, like you can see here and you'll see a little bit later. So then what we had in between 2018 and now is we've had a real shift in realism and also ownership. So crypto voxels is a virtual world which is built on blockchain. And the reason this was a paradigm shift was you have Roblox, you have Animal Crossing, you have Neopets, etc., etc. And obviously digital fashion becomes an increasingly significant component of these over their time in existence. However, you do not own the goods that you have in those platforms. If that platform went bust, the money that you have spent on those goods disappears, the goods disappear, so there's only a degree to which you can associate your identity with them. In crypto voxels, you actually own those pieces and you own your avatar, so you own your digital body. And so if that platform goes bust, you still have those assets. And for me, that was very significant because quite frankly, if I was going to go to a shop tomorrow and buy an expensive handbag and you told me that, Balenciaga could come and take it back from me at any point, I probably wouldn't buy it. So whilst these virtual worlds and blockchain-based virtual worlds are taking us a longer time to develop, that does not mean that their core tenets are not very important in how our identities progress. So then we have MetaHumans, Unreal Engine 2020, and so that's really obviously one of the biggest progresses in the standard of how real our virtual bodies can look. We had the PFP craze 2021, which I briefly touched on, but it's essentially this idea that your picture for profile can be something worth $100,000 and it's going to represent your identity. And specifically in the blockchain-based communities, what is crazy in my opinion is I have a lot of people that I interact with who I do not know the names of. I know what their PFP looks like. They have built entire brands around that PFP. And they literally interact by Discord usernames or Twitter handles and their PFP. So it is inextricable from their identity, or in my context of them, it is their entire identity. And then we have the final thing I'm going to talk about in terms of evolution, which is connected clothes. So around 2021, even though connected clothes are quite a broad topic and actually I think originated from 2013, there was this idea that you could connect your physical clothes to your digital identity. And so it could be from something as simple as a loyalty account, where you would tap an NFC chip on your clothing and you could have loyalty, or much more interestingly, you could actually have digital versions of your physical goods or digital perks associated with your physical goods, which is something that I'm going to go on to touch on shortly. So what I hope this quite thorough detailing of how we've been evolving has shown you is over time our digital bodies and our clothes have become increasingly customizable, increasingly ownable, and increasingly platform agnostic. So you look at where it is today, this kind of synthesizes everything that I was previously saying, but you have the digital world on one side again, physical world on the other side, and you have on the digital side, you have people wearing clothes in social simulations, video games, avatar-based social media. One of the most interesting avatar-based social media sites for me is this avatar-based social media site called Soul, which originated in China and is around solving a problem where I think it was some statistic like teenagers growing up in China have an average of 1 or 2 friends. And Soul has over 3 million users, and it's based on this concept that by interacting direct to avatar, people will feel more comfortable self-expressing and so develop deeper relationships. So then tending towards, slightly more towards the physical world, we have virtual communities. So like the ones I was telling you about, where there are groups of people who maybe define themselves by their digital identifiers, but may also interact in person, may also interact outside of games through messaging, or may rally around certain physical qualities. We have trad social media. So we live in a world now where it's incredibly common for us to use filters on Instagram, Snapchat, TikTok, etc. However, we're still curating versions of our physical lives rather than creating them fully digitally. We have traditional communications, which increasingly integrate avatars. Fagma avatars for me, which are Facebook, Apple, Google, Microsoft, and the other one, and Amazon, exactly. And actually Amazon just integrated virtual try-on, and same with Google. So we have this idea of these avatars becoming more common and more present. We have cosplay, where people are imitating digital characters in the physical. And we have digitally inspired design, which is conscious. And the differentiation I'm making here between conscious and unconscious is with conscious digitally inspired designs, it's you seeing, for example, an outfit in Dress to Impress and mimicking it in the way that you dress physically, or all of these incredible future-focused designers where you're making a clear allusion to the digital world in what you choose to wear, as opposed to unconscious digitally inspired design, which is also a massive thing, where you don't realize, but your clothes are being influenced by the digital world. And connected clothing also fits into that. So with all of that in mind, the question that we're now going to go in to exploring is this idea that, okay, we're seeing clothes become more platform agnostic, more customizable, and we're seeing them across this physical and digital spectrum. But does that mean that we want our digital clothes and our digital and physical bodies to be fused? Are we actually in search of one unitary digital body with our roots to self-express shared across platforms? Or is the way that we self-express actually going to take a different form? And so with that in mind, there are 3 conceptual approaches that I'm going to go through. The first one is this concept that we're going to crave cohesion. So we are going to want our digital and physical identities to be cohesive. And we're going to want to maintain a cohesive digital body that mimics our physical one and that is shared across platforms. And we're also going to want to maintain a consistent look across those platforms. So if I have something in Roblox, I'm going to want the same thing in Fortnite, I'm going to want the same thing in Animal Crossing, I'm going to want the same thing on my Instagram, and maybe I'm also going to want the same thing in person because I want to feel like me, and for me, that sense of self is unitary. The second idea is on the complete other end of the spectrum, and it's this idea of divorce. So it's this idea that our self-expression is going to splinter, and we're going to have different bodies and clothes for different worlds. The third one is this idea of transference. So it's the idea that our body and clothes will adhere to cohesive value transfers. Whilst we may not look the same across platforms, the essence of our style will translate. And so what I mean by that is we want to have a unitary sense of self, but the way that me, Dani, looks on Instagram is not the same way that me, Dani, will look in Roblox, but there will be a common thread, there will be a common sense of self that translates both in the way that my body looks and the way that my clothes look. So, with these 3 framings in mind, I'm gonna basically make the argument that the first option, which is this option of complete cohesion where everything looks the same, no matter where you are, both in terms of your body and in terms of the way you self-express, is actually unlikely to happen, and it's not actually interesting. And the reason for that is that I am a firm believer that clothes need context. Depending on the world that you're interacting in, for your self-expression to be successful, you have to adhere to the codes of that world. I have been saying this for a very, very long time, and I think the way that I describe it is quite simply, if I went to a baseball game wearing haute couture, no one would care. People might go, hey, cool outfit, but no one's going to know who the designer was. It's not actually going to give me any status, any affiliation, any clout, because it's not existing within its context. In a similar vein, if I go to a fashion show and I'm wearing a signed Lakers jersey, people are not going to be impressed that I have whatever player's signature on this Lakers jersey, because again, that good is out of context. So I think for fashion to really fulfill its role in self-expression, in affiliation, in status, even if we have unlimited technological potentials to transfer our identities across world, and we have all these potentials for creation and customization, etc., for our digital bodies and digital clothes to fulfill our identities in ways that really make us proud, they need to be rooted in a context. And in the virtual world, just as the physical space, there's this idea of the hard code of the world itself. So going back to what we discussed originally, it's this idea of literally within a platform, what can you and can you not do due to programming. So I think of this kind of like the laws of the physical world. So can I speak to other people or not? Can I move front and back or not? Can I change my clothes or not? The second one is the soft code, which is much more to do with the law, the thing that we were saying at the beginning around the purpose of the game. So, in a questing game, you can actually make friends, you can actually build cities, but it's not really what the game was created for. It's not really what the makers of the game are trying to push you to do. And then finally, that world's community. So what are the norms and behaviors? And so these are the three qualities that you need to consider when you're thinking about the ways that our digital clothes and our virtual bodies are going to play out. And whilst I think divorce is a very interesting concept, so as I said here, with this in mind, it's likely that our identities will not be cohesive. They will splinter in order to adhere to the cultural clothes that exist platform to platform, unless we can find a way to convert context on a world-by-world basis. So essentially, option one, cohesion, probably not going to happen. That means that we are highly likely to see splintering, where there's digital identities scattered all over the place, unless we find a way to convert context in a way where we can have a unitary sense of self and a unitary way to express the essence of our clothing or the essence of our roots to self-expression or our style that can be transferable and can fit into different contexts. And so the only people I've actually seen doing this so far is a company called Tribute Brand. Tribute Brand was founded in 2020 by an incredible founder called Gala Maria Verbanic. And they were actually the brand that really converted me into digital fashion. So back in 2020, when I was looking into this conceptually, when I saw their clothes, and this is me wearing 3 of their different outfits, I was like, okay, digital fashion is here right now. So the background of the team is they are a group of incredible digital designers, digital artists, and also physical fashion designers. And they were dissatisfied with fashion. They saw it as unsustainable, they saw it as outdated. And so during the pandemic, they launched what they call OG Line, which was a collection of garments which you could render onto yourself, or they would render onto you using what they called the premium fitting service. So in each of these cases, I sent them a photo of myself, and I bought each piece, I think for like 60, 70 pounds. And they gave me back this photo, which I posted on Instagram. So that was my first experience of experimenting with my digital body. They've gone on to build great AR experiences, great in-game experiences, and a physical clothing line. But the thing that they are focused on integrally is this idea of being a brand that creates clothes for all of your realities. And they're a firm believer that, look at these, like these are, in my eyes, exceptional pieces, but they are completely impossible to physically create. So instead of trying to physically create them, they say, okay, we're not going to replicate this. We're going to distill the essence, think about what that essence is, and transfer it into a physical version, which could look completely different, but hopefully conveys the same message, the same design philosophies as the digital piece. And so their first foray into this was with a project that they call Punk. Hopefully, it's pretty obvious, it's a parody of Victoria's Secret Pink. So this is the Pink logo, this is the Punk logo, this is their Punk tracksuit, Punk dog, Pink dog. So The thing that I found especially significant was this was essentially kind of a collection of digital ready-mades. So they're taking it out of context, they're distorting it, but they're keeping the integral brand identifiers. And the key thing about punk is it exists in different ways on different platforms. So we have the logo, for example. So when you buy a punk piece, you get a unique generative logo, which mirrors the pink logo. So as I referenced earlier, there's a whole PFP craze where you convey status by having a specific profile picture on Twitter in the crypto-based universe. They specifically said, okay, we think fashion, we think your digital body, if you're in the crypto universe, is your Twitter account. It is the way that you are expressing yourself, and we're going to enhance that with giving you a PFP. So that logo, for them, is what digital fashion under the punk drop looks like on Twitter. Then there was the physical piece, which is a punk tracksuit, and obviously, again, parody of the pink tracksuit. And their idea is, okay, under this punk essence, this is what a physical piece of clothing looks like. Then the final component is Punky, which is a digital avatar that exists both in game and in AR, which is based off the Victoria's Secret pink mascot, which is this dog. So I'll give you a little showcase of how Punky looks. So essentially what they did, as I hope you can see, is they said one essence, the essence of the collection is around a parody on Victoria's Secret pink. We're going to use these signifiers of what Victoria's Secret pink represents, but we're going to alter them for how the same message can be conveyed in different virtual spaces that people occupy. So for me, what this means is Tribute Brand is distilling fashion to its core. Fashion is an enhancement of identity attached to your body. In the physical world, our bodies are flesh and blood, but in their digital forms, our bodies are platform contingent. They can be represented by our social media profiles or our in-game avatars. And in this new paradigm, the form fashion will take will substantially shift. Which brings me on to thoughts for the future, which Daniel, you and I can chat through together, or I can just take questions. But essentially, the things that this all makes me think about is what can and cannot be considered fashion when it's so abstracted away from physical clothing, and it's instead you electing a virtual body based on its uses, so the fact it can be a social media profile, it can be an avatar, etc. And so if there's an orb floating above my head in a digital world and it's associated with my digital body, is that my fashion? Is a piece of art that I post on my Twitter account, if it's something that leads people to perceive me in a different way, is that my fashion? And obviously within that question, where do the boundaries between fashion and art lie? In what ways is our digital clout going to be physically transmitted in the future? I think we've already seen a movement from physical trends being represented in the digital to digital trends influencing the way that we express physically. Will our increasing comfort with idealized digital curation lead us towards a polarized world where we crave grit and grime? So if we have these perfectly created digital bodies where you can completely separate yourself from your physical imperfections or insecurities, when we're looking towards how we want to present IRL, is it going to become super gritty? Is it going to be super imperfection focused? Because that is now the purest way to show our humanity, so it becomes fetishized. And then the final one is how are we going to sculpt these new symbols, these new forms of craft that allow us to thrive and exist in digital worlds. Thank you, everyone.